Life, it just changes on a dime. But I never imagined it could change so completely. Overnight, I went from being a cherished wife to a fish on the chopping block, utterly at their mercy. It all started the day Robert, my poor husband, passed away. Robert was gone. Just like that. One moment we were planning our summer vacation to Maine, and he was complaining my blueberry muffins weren't sweet enough. The next, he was lying in a hospital bed, a flatline on the EKG. 10 years, just swept away like a breeze, leaving me alone in this big, empty house, wrapped tightly in a bone-deep sorrow. We met 10 years ago. I was already past 50 then. He was a few years older than me, a retired engineer but full of life. His eyes would crinkle when he smiled, and it was absolutely contagious. I, on the other hand, had long gotten used to being single, figured that was just how my life would be. But Robert was like a ray of light, suddenly bursting into my world. He was different. He knew how to love someone, how to make you feel cherished. Every day we spent together felt like stolen happiness. He told me countless times he'd take care of me forever, that I'd never want for anything. He was a man of his word. He never gave me a reason to worry. He always said, "Martha, don't you worry about a thing. You just focus on being beautiful, and I'll handle everything else." Every time he said that, I felt so secure, truly like I had a rock-solid pillar of support. Our home was in a beautiful little town in upstate New York. He said he'd picked this house especially for me. It had a spacious kitchen. He knew I loved tinkering with all sorts of baking in there. And a big backyard where I could plant my beloved roses. He'd always sit in his big rocking chair in the living room, watching me bustle about, sometimes teasing me, saying I was like a busy little bee. Now, that chair sits empty, and the orchid he loved has bloomed, but the house no longer holds his unique scent of tobacco and faint cologne. It's just me now, brewing his favorite Earl Grey tea, sitting there, tears streaming down my face unstoppable. The pain wasn't like a knife cutting flesh. It was like my heart was being ripped apart, every breath tasting of blood. Robert's funeral was a respectable affair. Many people came, his old colleagues, my friends, and some mutual acquaintances. David, along with his 2 younger siblings, was there too. They wore black, their faces showing just the right amount of grief. They looked the part, I suppose. David was his eldest son, in his 40s, tall and thin, always wearing those gold-rimmed glasses. He and I never got along. From the day I married Robert, he'd never given me a kind look. In his eyes, I was probably just some gold digger after his father's money. His 2 younger siblings, Tom and Emily, weren't as aggressive, but they followed David's lead, trailing behind him like shadows. As soon as the funeral was over, before I even had a chance to catch my breath, they rushed into my house, like a pack of hungry wolves. David stood in the center of the living room, scanning the room, then said in a tone laced with feigned concern, "Martha, are you all right? We know you must be terribly upset right now, so we rushed over, hoping to be of some help." Help. I scoffed inwardly. I knew them too well. These people only ever helped themselves. Tom and Emily echoed his words. Emily even came over and gave me a brief, almost lukewarm hug. I could feel their eyes appraising everything, from my clothes to the furnishings, as if they were evaluating something. I just nodded blankly. The grief in my heart hadn't subsided, and I simply didn't have the energy to deal with them. For the next few days, they just moved right in. Robert had always been used to having guests, so there were enough rooms. But their presence brought me no comfort. Instead, it felt like a dark cloud hanging over me. They weren't really there to help with the arrangements. They were there to snoop. David especially liked sitting in the living room, flipping through Robert's old ledgers, putting on a show. Every now and then he'd look up, give me a thoughtful expression, and then throw out a question. "Martha, do you know where Dad's retirement account is? Or, did Dad ever mention to you what stocks he invested in?" I was still deep in grief then, so I didn't pay much attention. I just figured they were interested in Robert's inheritance, but I didn't think much of it. Later, their questions started getting more direct. "Martha, do you have any idea how much Dad's estate is worth? Did he ever talk to you about his will?" One time, David even sat directly opposite me, pushed up his glasses, and his tone became serious. Martha, if you'll excuse my bluntness, while Dad was alive, he might not have gone into detail about his financial situation with you. I know you might be grieving right now, but these things need to be handled. You, a woman with so many complicated matters, might find it all a bit overwhelming, wouldn't you? Overwhelming. Something felt off to me right then. What did he mean, you a woman? When Robert was alive, I was never just an appendage to him. I had my own life, my own circle of friends. But I was too tired then, too weary to argue with him. I just replied wearily. Robert had everything arranged. He was very meticulous, he always handled things perfectly. I clearly remembered Robert mentioning just a few months ago that he'd had his lawyer update his will, arranging everything clearly so I could have peace of mind. He'd even half-jokingly said he didn't want me to be hounded by those vultures later on. At the time, I didn't take it to heart, thinking he was just kidding. Who knew his words would turn out to be prophetic? And what happened? Just 4 days after Robert's burial, David called me into Robert's study, a place he'd now declared off-limits. He was sitting in Robert's usual executive chair, holding a yellowed document. His face was serious, and his voice turned incredibly cold. Martha, we've searched everywhere, and this is the only will we've found. He pushed the document towards me, tapping it with his finger. This one was signed by Dad before he married you. It clearly states that all his assets go to us, his children. As for you. He paused, a hint of undetectable triumph in his eyes. You're only entitled to some of the daily expenses he gave you while he was alive. The rest, I'm afraid, is out of your reach. My heart sank immediately. What? A prenuptial will? How could this be? Robert clearly said he'd updated his will. He left everything to me. I even remembered him mentioning that the new will explicitly stated that the house, savings, stocks, the vast majority of it, would go to me. He even joked at the time, that way you can continue living your life of leisure, and no one will be able to pry a single penny from your hands. David, what are you talking about? This is impossible. I shot up, pointing at the old will, my voice trembling. Robert updated his will last year. Where's the new will? It clearly states that he left most of his estate to me. David sneered, that smile like a cold knife twisting in my gut. Martha, I know this might be hard for you to accept, but we've truly searched everywhere. You know, Dad was a very meticulous man. If he really had a new will, it wouldn't just vanish into thin air. Perhaps you're mistaken? People get older. Sometimes their memory gets a bit hazy. He paused, his tone becoming aggressive. This will is the only legal one right now. You'd best accept this fact. Or if it goes to court, it won't be good for either of us. My mind went blank. Was he threatening me? Was he implying I was senile, my memory failing? I looked at David's hypocritical face. In that moment, anger, like a fire, ignited the alertness within me that grief had temporarily suppressed. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Robert would never do this to me. In the days that followed, I felt like I was living in a nightmare. David and his siblings had practically taken over the house. They started making unauthorized changes to the house, claiming it was for security. They changed all the locks, even the one on my bedroom door, saying it was to prevent outsiders from breaking in. But I always felt they were trying to trap me inside. What I couldn't stand the most was that Robert's study, his favorite place to be, became off-limits to me. David said, Dad's study is full of important documents. We need to sort them out. You're emotionally unstable right now, so it's best you don't go in and make things more complicated. He even chained the study door shut. The rattling of that chain, to my ears, sounded like it was severing the last connection I had with Robert. I also noticed my mail started disappearing. At first, it was just some bank statements missing. I thought they'd gotten lost in the mail. Later, I found that letters from my friends, even some invitations to tea parties, had also mysteriously vanished. When I asked David, he just shrugged and said, Maybe the mailman made a mistake, Martha. You've been so distracted lately. Perhaps you misplaced something yourself? His tone carried that condescending air of superiority, which made me extremely uncomfortable. What was even more alarming was that David started spreading rumors. One of my old friends, Lily, called me. Her voice was a little hesitant. "Martha, are you all right? David said you haven't been well lately, that you need more rest, and that we shouldn't bother you. He also said you were a bit out of sorts and needed space?" I couldn't believe my ears. What did he mean I wasn't well? What did he mean I was out of sorts? I was grieving, yes, but my mind was perfectly clear. He was trying to isolate me from my friends, from my world. He wanted to turn me into a helpless old woman, so he could manipulate me as he pleased. Those days, I couldn't sleep at all at night. Lying in bed, I could almost hear David and his siblings whispering in the living room, punctuated by occasional laughter. This wasn't Robert's home anymore. It had become David's castle, and I, the mistress of the house, was like an intruder, a prisoner trapped within it. I felt a despair I'd never known, and a furious sense of betrayal. "Robert, you promised you'd take care of me. You couldn't possibly have left me alone to face all this." My gut told me this wasn't as simple as it seemed. Robert's will couldn't have just vanished into thin air. I had to, and I would find the truth. David and his siblings thought that by keeping me cooped up at home and spreading a few rumors, I'd truly become unwell, a silly old woman who just cried all the time. They really underestimated me, Martha. Robert had been with me for 10 years. He wasn't the kind of man to leave a mess for others, especially not for me. He was a meticulous and orderly man his entire life. From his toolbox to his bank accounts, everything was perfectly organized. Even his newspapers had to be folded neatly. How could he casually let an important will disappear? And he loved me so much. How could he possibly leave me with nothing, at the mercy of others? Those days, though I forced myself to endure the grief during the day, pretending I knew nothing, I couldn't sleep at all once night fell. My mind was like a movie projector, replaying snippets of my time with Robert, frame by frame. His words, "Martha, don't you worry about a thing. You just focus on being beautiful, and I'll handle everything else," echoed in my ears. He wasn't just talk. He promised to take care of me, and he wouldn't break his word. I replayed his words over and over in my mind. He'd mentioned the new will last summer, when we were sitting in the backyard gazebo, sipping iced tea. He said, "Martha, I've updated all the documents and put them in a special place, where no one else can find them. That way, even if I'm gone, you'll be able to live comfortably, without worrying about all the miscellaneous things." At the time, I even laughed at him, saying he always thought of everything so thoroughly. But now that I think about it, when he said special place, there was a hint of mystery in his voice, and a touch of slyness, like he was hiding a little secret. Special place. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The phrase struck me like lightning, suddenly cutting through my mind. Robert had many special places, where he kept his little trinkets. He loved old antiques, things that carried a history. Suddenly, as if struck by something, I shot up from the bed. That old antique desk. That desk, Robert had found it more than 20 years ago at a flea market. He'd been proud of it for ages, saying it was a desk with a story. He often read, wrote, and doodled at that desk. He said the desk was incredibly sturdy, and that it had a secret compartment, specially designed by an old craftsman to hide little unknown things. At the time, I just found it interesting and didn't think much of it. But now, those words suddenly became incredibly clear in my mind, as if he were whispering them right into my ear. I remembered. David and his siblings had taken over Robert's study, ransacking the place, but I noticed they didn't seem to care much about that antique desk. The desk looked old and clunky, completely unremarkable, and it didn't fit in at all with the modern furniture in the study. They probably thought it was just a piece of junk and didn't bother to examine it closely. Yes, that's it. My heart pounded. A long-lost hope surged through me. I'd been suffocating under David and his siblings these past few days, and now, I finally saw a glimmer of light. But how would I get in? The study door was locked, and David had even secured it with a heavy chain, instructing Tom and Emily to take turns guarding it, afraid I'd get in. And me, an old woman, how could I possibly pry open that door? I needed help. The first person who came to mind was Maria. Maria was the housekeeper Robert had hired, a Mexican woman in her 40s, hardworking and kind. She'd worked for us for 5 years and had a great relationship with both Robert and me. She was like family to us, knew everything that went on in the house. After Robert passed, she quietly stayed by my side, cooking for me, taking care of me. I could also tell she was very unhappy with David and his siblings' behavior. The next morning, David and his siblings left bright and early, saying they were going to the lawyer's office to handle some things. I knew they were probably going to figure out how to further cut me out. I forced myself to suppress my anxiety, and as soon as they left, I immediately called out to Maria, who was busy in the kitchen. "Maria, I need your help." I tried to keep my voice calm, but my inner excitement was hard to hide. Maria put down her dishcloth and looked at me, puzzled. "Ma'am, what's wrong? You don't look well." I walked over to her and lowered my voice. "David and his siblings won't let me into the study. You know, they locked the door." Maria nodded, a hint of indignation on her face. "Yes, ma'am, they're going too far. Mr. Robert loved his study. How can they treat you like this?" "I suspect they've hidden Robert's new will." I stated my suspicion directly. I remember Robert saying he hid important documents in that old antique desk, in a secret compartment. Maria's eyes lit up. She was a smart woman and immediately understood what I meant. "So you want to go in and look for it?" "Yes, I have to get in." "Maria, do you know where the spare key to the study is? Or do you have any way to help me open that door?" I clutched her hand, a little nervous. This was my only hope. Maria thought for a moment. Then her expression became resolute. "Ma'am, Mr. Robert was always so good to us. I can't stand to see Mr. David and his siblings treating you like this. There's no spare key, but there's a small toolbox behind the kitchen, with some of Mr. Robert's usual tools. I remember a small saw in there, and some crowbars. Maybe they could help." My heart instantly lightened, as if I'd clutched a lifeline. "Wonderful. Maria, let's go now." The two of us cautiously approached the study door. The heavy chain and the brand new padlock on the door seemed to mock me. Maria found a small saw and a screwdriver from the toolbox. She first tried to pry the lock with the screwdriver, but it didn't work. "This lock is too sturdy," Maria said, frowning. "Then can we saw through the door?" I pointed at the door frame, my voice trembling. I knew it would damage the house, but at that moment I couldn't care less. Maria looked at the door frame, then at the saw in her hand, a flicker of hesitation crossing her face. But quickly, she made up her mind. "For you, ma'am, I'll try." She began to work. The small saw made a grating, squeaking sound against the door frame, piercingly loud in the empty house. My heart was in my throat, terrified David and his siblings would suddenly return. Maria was very careful, her movements gentle, trying not to make too much noise. She wrapped a cloth around the saw to muffle the friction sound. Sweat ran down her forehead, but she didn't bother to wipe it. After about 20 minutes, that damned door finally had a small opening sawed through it. Maria pried with the screwdriver, and the latch came loose. The chain clattered to the floor, sounding almost like a trumpet call of freedom. As the door opened, the study was filled with the smell of dust and old books. Robert's study was finally open to me again. I didn't bother to look around. I rushed straight for that old antique desk. The desk sat by the window, made of heavy wood, with some worn spots showing mottled marks. Scattered on the desktop were some newspapers Robert had read, and his favorite magnifying glass. David and his siblings clearly hadn't bothered to clean up here. They'd just taken what they considered important documents. I began to examine the desk carefully. The desktop, the drawers, the legs. I ran my hands over every surface. The desk had 5 drawers in total. I pulled them all open and looked inside. There were only some old stationery and Robert's past letters. Nothing. My heart began to sink again. "Ma'am, is that secret compartment you mentioned very well hidden?" Maria asked anxiously, standing nearby. "Yes, Robert said it was very hidden," I said, tapping various parts of the desk with my hand, listening for hollow sounds. I even knelt down, lying on the floor, carefully examining the bottom of the desk. Suddenly, my fingers brushed against an unusual spot. On the inner side of the bottom drawer, near the leg, there was a piece of wood, slightly darker in color than the surrounding area. I pressed it with my finger, and felt as if it could be pushed. "Maria, look here!" I exclaimed excitedly. Maria knelt down too, observing carefully. She touched it with her finger, then gently pushed. With a soft click, the piece of wood actually receded inwards. And then, a small, narrow secret compartment appeared before us. I nearly screamed. I found it. I really found it. My hands trembled slightly as I carefully reached inside. I felt a stack of documents and a small leather-bound notebook. I pulled them all out. First, I picked up the document. It was a yellowed envelope, with Robert's distinctive neat handwriting on it. My last will and testament, signed April 12, 2023. The date was last year, exactly matching what Robert had told me. I eagerly tore open the envelope and unfolded the contents. This will meticulously detailed Robert's estate distribution. It clearly stated that he bequeathed this residence in upstate New York, along with most of his bank deposits, stocks and investments, to me, Martha. He even specifically noted that he wished for me to live out my golden years here, without worrying about any financial issues. Finally, there was Robert's signature, along with the signatures and seals of the notary public and 2 witnesses. Everything was so proper, so authentic. Tears welled up in my eyes. These weren't tears of sadness, but of injustice, excitement, and a touch of relief. "Robert, you really didn't lie to me. You truly thought of everything for me." Maria also leaned in to look, and when she saw the contents of the will, her eyes welled up too. "Ma'am, this is wonderful. Mr. Robert truly didn't disappoint you." I clutched the will tightly, then picked up the small leather-bound notebook. The notebook looked very old, its edges worn and faded. I opened it and found Robert's handwriting inside. At first, I just wanted to see if there were any other explanations inside. But when I casually flipped through a few pages, the contents shocked me. This wasn't an ordinary diary. Robert had recorded some of his disputes with David, and financial matters within it. David came asking for money again, saying his company was struggling with cash flow. I've helped him many times, but he's always like this, never satisfied. This time he said he wanted to use his company shares as collateral. What a bottomless pit. I discovered David secretly tampering with my investment account. Though the amount wasn't large, the behavior made me very uncomfortable. I've warned him, but he always makes excuses. That project David said would make a lot of money, but something about it just didn't sit right with me. I checked his accounts and found some discrepancies. Was he up to something behind my back? In the diary, Robert meticulously documented David's various attempts to solicit money from him over the past few years, as well as some of his improper financial dealings. Robert grew increasingly disappointed and distrustful of him. He also mentioned that David had once attempted to forge his signature. Although Robert caught it in time, preventing a major disaster, that incident completely disheartened Robert towards David. Robert wrote in the diary, "I can no longer indulge David. He's too greedy. I must protect my estate and not let it fall into irresponsible hands." This small diary not only exposed David's greed and unscrupulousness, but also explained why Robert had specifically updated his will and hidden the documents so discreetly. He knew David would covet his assets. He was protecting me, protecting his estate from being plundered, in this way. I clutched the will and the diary tightly to my chest, my emotions a complex mix. On one hand, there was the excitement and relief of finding the truth. On the other, anger towards David and a deep love for Robert. It turned out he had anticipated all of this before his death, and had made thorough preparations for me. "David, did you think by producing that old will, you could keep me in the dark? Did you think you could do whatever you pleased? You were wrong, terribly wrong. Now I had the weapons to fight back. I knew what to do. I would settle this score with you, every single detail." Finding the real will and Robert's diary felt like a lightning bolt had struck my world, instantly dispelling all the gloom and despair. I was no longer the Martha trapped by grief and helplessness. I felt like an eagle caged, who had suddenly found the key to unlock its cage. In that moment, I had only one thought. David, your good days are over. The next day, before David and his siblings were even awake, I secretly called Mr. Henderson. My voice held a barely suppressed excitement as I told him I'd found Robert's new will and a diary documenting David's unsavory actions. Mr. Henderson's tone immediately turned serious when he heard. He told me he'd come over as soon as possible. When Mr. Henderson appeared at my doorstep, David's face looked like he'd swallowed a fly. He probably hadn't expected Mr. Henderson to suddenly show up, let alone specifically ask to see me. Mr. Henderson was an experienced lawyer. He simply explained casually that he needed to confirm some legal documents regarding Robert's estate with me. Though David was reluctant, he didn't dare act too brazenly in front of Mr. Henderson. After all, Mr. Henderson had a reputable standing in the legal community. I led Mr. Henderson to my bedroom, closed the door, then carefully retrieved the will and diary from their hiding place and handed them to him. Mr. Henderson put on his reading glasses and picked up the will first. He read it carefully, word by word. His expression slowly shifted from calm to surprised, then delighted, and finally, he let out a long breath, a look of immense relief spreading across his face. Martha, this really is Mr. Robert's handwriting, and his signature. The date is also last April, which matches my records exactly. He looked up at me excitedly, a hint of incredulous thrill in his voice. I thought it was strange at the time. Mr. Robert clearly updated his will last year, leaving most of his assets to you, so how could it have suddenly disappeared? I even thought I'd remembered wrong, or that Mr. Robert had changed his mind. Now it all makes sense. His hand, holding the will, even trembled slightly, as if he held a rediscovered treasure. He repeatedly confirmed the will's validity, the notary's signature, the witnesses' signatures. Everything was impeccable. This will was authentic and valid. And this Mr. Henderson. I handed him the leather-bound diary. In here, Robert documented many of David's improper actions. Mr. Henderson took the diary and flipped through it page by page. His brow furrowed deeper and deeper, and his expression grew increasingly serious. When he saw Robert's entries detailing David's attempts to forge his signature and various solicitations for money, he let out a heavy sigh. Mr. Robert was truly a meticulous man, to have even recorded all this. Martha, this diary will be one of our strongest pieces of evidence. He closed the diary and his eyes sharpened. Martha, now we have Mr. Robert's true will and evidence of David's improper conduct. We must act immediately. We can't let David and his siblings continue to wreak havoc. He pondered for a moment, then began outlining the next steps. First, we need to conduct a deeper investigation into David's past. This diary provides many leads, such as records of his attempts to defraud Mr. Robert, and his past acts of forging signatures on minor documents. I'll have my team verify this information, looking for more evidence from bank records, company documents, and even public court records. Do you think David would destroy the original will? I asked. Mr. Henderson scoffed. Given what I know about David and everything he's doing now, that's highly likely. He knows that will exists, and he knows it would leave him with nothing. So he'll definitely try to make it disappear. However, even if the original will has been destroyed, we have ways to prove its existence, Mr. Henderson continued. I'll contact the notary public who notarized Mr. Roberts' will at the time, and the two witnesses. They are all independent third parties, and their testimonies are crucial. They can confirm that the will indeed existed, and that its contents are exactly as this one. Over the next few days, Mr. Henderson's team began to work at full throttle. Although I couldn't go out and investigate myself, I spoke with Mr. Henderson daily to keep abreast of the progress. He told me his team was very efficient and quickly made headway. They really did find traces of David attempting to misappropriate Robert's funds from some old financial records. Though the amounts weren't large, it was enough to prove his motive and pattern of behavior. Mr. Henderson also told me they even found traces of Robert's forged signature on some seemingly unimportant documents David had signed in the past. These pieces of evidence, though just the tip of the iceberg, were enough to demonstrate David's character. Every time I heard this, I felt a wave of nausea, and it only strengthened my resolve to kick David out of this house. Robert had worked hard his entire life. I absolutely couldn't let such a parasite ruin it. At the same time, Mr. Henderson also contacted the notary public who had notarized Robert's will at the time, a woman named Ms. Green. Ms. Green was a bit vague at first, as she handled many documents every day. But when Mr. Henderson reminded her of Robert's name and some details of the will, she quickly recalled it. She clearly remembered Mr. Robert emphasizing that he wanted to ensure Martha would be well taken care of, which was why he specifically updated his will. She even remembered Robert joking at the time that he wanted to shut certain people up. Ms. Green confirmed that the will indeed existed, and its contents were exactly consistent with the one we found. The two witnesses were also contacted. They were close friends of Robert, an elderly couple. They also confirmed that they were indeed in Mr. Henderson's office at the time, personally witnessing Robert sign the new will, and that its contents indeed bequeathed most of his estate to me. They also said that Robert had specifically told them then, "I certainly don't want Martha to be wronged after I'm gone." Hearing this, my eyes welled up again. Robert's love for me truly ran bone deep. With these testimonies, my confidence grew even stronger. David, no matter how much you try to argue, you won't be able to deny it. Besides this legal evidence, I thought of another important force, Robert's friends. Robert had many close friends during his lifetime. They often gathered at our house. I knew some of them had personally witnessed Robert's growing frustration with David's constant demands for money. I called Robert's best friend Bill. Bill was a retired university professor, an upright man, and like a brother to Robert. I told him, in full detail, everything David had been doing lately, and about finding the will. After listening, Bill was so furious he swore on the phone. That bastard. I knew he was no good. Robert used to complain to me constantly about David, saying he was a vampire, who just sucked his money dry. He even told me he was going to change his will. He couldn't let a spendthrift like David squander his life's work. Bill also told me that once at a golf gathering, Robert had a few too many drinks and complained to their old buddies about David. He said David wanted him to invest in a shady project, and after he refused, David even threatened him. Robert's face went white with anger then, saying he was going to cut David off completely. "Martha, don't you worry if needed, I will absolutely testify in court," Bill said unequivocally. We, his old buddies, all know Robert's intentions. He considered you his whole world. He would never let you be wronged. Bill's declaration filled me with immense warmth. Besides Bill, I also contacted several of Robert's friends with whom he often played cards and fished. They were all indignant about David's behavior, and readily offered to testify for me. They all remembered Robert's love for me, and his disappointment in David. These testimonies from friends, though not legal documents, could powerfully demonstrate Robert's true intentions and David's despicable character on an emotional level. They were like mirrors, reflecting David's ugly truth. Every time I finished a call with Mr. Henderson or chatted with Robert's friends, I felt a little stronger. I was no longer the widow who just hid at home and cried. I was steadily gathering my weapons, preparing for a tough fight. Mr. Henderson had already begun preparing to file the probate petition. He told me it would be a tough battle, and David would surely fight back, but he was confident. I looked out the window. Sunlight streamed into my backyard, illuminating the roses Robert had planted for me, blooming vibrantly. I took a deep breath, inhaling the faint floral scent in the air. "Robert, rest assured. I won't let you down. I will take back everything that belongs to us." Mr. Henderson moved quickly, so fast that I barely had time to react before the gauntlet had been thrown. He told me he had formally filed a petition for probate with the court, requesting that the court recognize Robert's new will that I had found. At the same time, he also challenged the validity of the old will David had submitted, citing fraud and undue influence. When I heard the word fraud, a chill ran down my spine. I knew then that David's good days were truly over. Mr. Henderson told me this was called a will contest, and in New York State, it was no small matter. He explained that he had submitted all our evidence, the latest will, Mr. Robert's diary, and the testimonies of the notary public and witnesses. He had even prepared some preliminary evidence of David's past financial misconduct. He told me the court would soon schedule a hearing, and then we would confront David head-on. David's call came through while I was sipping my Earl Grey tea. His voice was high-pitched and furious, with the frantic rage of an enraged beast. "Martha! You old hag! What in the world have you done? That old coot Henderson called me, saying you found a new will? And that I committed fraud? Are you out of your mind? You forged the will, didn't you?" I set down my teacup, my voice so calm it surprised even myself. "David, I'm not crazy. I've merely brought the truth to light. Robert's wishes are clearly written in that will. As for fraud, you should know best what you've done. You're talking nonsense. That will is fake. You forged it. And that diary, you made all of that up." He was practically roaring, and even over the phone, I could feel his rage. "Do you think you can get Dad's property like this? Dream on. I won't let you get away with it. I'll sue you for forging documents and ruin your reputation." I scoffed. "David, the truth will out. I'll see you in court." With that, I hung up. My hand trembled slightly, but my heart was calmer than ever. I knew the more frantic he became, the more it meant we'd hit a nerve. Soon, the date for the court hearing was set. That day, I wore a dark suit, and Mr. Henderson was by my side. He looked composed and calm, giving me immense strength. David was there too, with his 2 younger siblings. They were all dressed in black, their faces grim. David's eyes were bloodshot, looking as if he hadn't slept for days. When he saw me, his eyes were filled with venom and rage, as if he wanted to devour me whole. The courtroom atmosphere was solemn and oppressive. The judge sat high up, his gaze sharp. Mr. Henderson first presented our claims. His tone was clear, his logic rigorous, laying out all the doubts about the old will David had submitted, and the process by which we found the new will, one by one before the judge. "Your Honor, we have ample evidence to prove that Mr. Robert Harris, prior to his death, legally signed a new will, explicitly bequeathing the majority of his estate to my client, Ms. Martha." Mr. Henderson gestured to me, then motioned for his assistant to present a copy of the new will to the judge. This will was signed in the presence of a notary public and 2 witnesses, in full compliance with legal requirements. As for the so-called old will submitted by Mr. David, not only does it contradict Mr. Robert's wishes during his lifetime, but we also have strong reasons to doubt its authenticity. Next, Mr. Henderson called Ms. Green, the notary public, and the 2 witnesses to testify. Though Ms. Green was elderly, her recollection of Robert signing the will was clear, and her tone firm. She described how Robert had emphasized his wish for Martha to live out her golden years comfortably, and how he had specifically instructed her to keep the will safe. The 2 witnesses also testified separately. They both clearly remembered Robert's state of mind at the time and the general contents of the will. Their testimonies were like bricks, dismantling David's wall of lies, one by one. When it was my turn to testify, my heart was pounding a bit, but when I saw David's contorted face, I suddenly felt I had to tell the judge Robert's true wishes, and everything I had endured. I took a deep breath and began to speak. "Your Honor, I was with Robert for 10 years. He was the love of my life. He promised me countless times that he would always take care of me, ensuring I'd never want for anything. He was a man of his word. He would not, and could not, leave me with nothing." My voice caught slightly, but I quickly regained my composure. After Robert passed away, David and his siblings eagerly intruded into my life. They spread rumors, claiming I was mentally unwell, attempting to isolate me from the outside world. They changed the locks on the house and even restricted my access to Robert's study, his favorite place during his lifetime. I looked at David. His eyes flickered away for a moment, but quickly returned to his usual dismissive expression. They produced a so-called old will, forcing me to accept this fact. But I knew clearly that Robert had updated his will last year. He personally told me he left everything to me. Deep down, a voice always told me the truth had to be hidden somewhere. I paused, my voice growing firm. I eventually found this true will in Robert's beloved antique desk. At the same time, I also found Robert's diary. That diary documented how Mr. David had, for years, continuously solicited money from Mr. Robert, even attempting to defraud his own father. Mr. Robert wrote in the diary that he could no longer indulge David, and that he had to protect his estate. When I mentioned the contents of the diary, David's face turned ashen. He suddenly stood up, pointing at me, and shouted at the judge, "She's lying. Your Honor, she's lying about everything. That will is a forgery. That diary is something she fabricated. She just wants to seize my father's estate." The judge rapped his gavel, signaling him to be quiet. "Mr. David, mind your language, or I will hold you in contempt of court." Mr. Henderson, at the opportune moment, presented Robert's diary, along with a report from a handwriting analysis expert. "Your Honor, to prove the authenticity of the will and the diary, we specifically invited the renowned handwriting analysis expert, Dr. Jones," Mr. Henderson said. Dr. Jones was an elderly woman with graying hair. She appeared very meticulous. She walked to the witness stand and began to state her findings in a professional, unemotional tone. "Based on my professional analysis, the signature on this new will submitted by Ms. Martha perfectly matches Mr. Robert's handwriting from his lifetime, with no traces of forgery. And the handwriting in Mr. Robert's diary is, without a doubt, Mr. Robert's own." She paused, then continued. "More importantly, we analyzed Mr. Robert's signature on the old will submitted by Mr. David. We found that while this signature appears similar, professional analysis revealed clear signs of alteration, indicating characteristics of imitation and tracing. Furthermore, we found traces of Mr. David destroying the original will in some seemingly inconspicuous details. For instance, the edges of the old will's paper showed signs of having been forcibly torn and then smoothed out, which is inconsistent with an old document preserved naturally. Moreover, in the ink of the old will, we discovered a special chemical compound commonly used to remove ink. This indicates that someone attempted to modify or erase certain contents on the original document." When Dr. Jones uttered these words, the entire courtroom fell silent. David's face turned livid. He stood frozen like a statue, his eyes hollow, as if all strength had been drained from him. His younger siblings also lowered their heads, not daring to look at him. I knew in that moment, David was utterly finished. His carefully woven lies had completely collapsed in the face of irrefutable evidence. The air in the courtroom was as heavy as a lead slab, making it hard to breathe. As Dr. Jones, the handwriting expert, revealed the truth of David's forged signatures and destruction of evidence, word by word, in her unemotional voice, I could feel the entire courtroom ripple with shock. David's face went from ashen to livid, finally turning a deathly gray. He slumped in his chair as if his bones had been removed, his eyes terrifyingly hollow. His younger siblings, Tom and Emily, didn't even dare to lift their heads, as if they wanted to shrink into the floor. I looked at them. There was no joy of victory in my heart, only a deep weariness and sorrow. This shouldn't have happened. If David had been content, if he'd had even a shred of conscience, Robert's life's work wouldn't have been dragged into court like this. The judge's gaze swept over David, then settled on my face. He rapped his gavel, his voice authoritative and resonant. "Given all the evidence presented in this case, including Mr. Robert Harris's authentic will, his personal diary, the testimonies of the notary public and witnesses, and the professional report from the handwriting analysis expert, this court rules." My heart was in my throat. The entire courtroom was silent, all eyes fixed on the judge. I could even hear my own heart pounding fiercely. That the will signed by Mr. Robert Harris on April 12, 2023, is deemed a legal and valid will. The old will submitted by Mr. David Harris is hereby ruled invalid due to fraud and undue influence. Furthermore, given Mr. David Harris's alleged serious offenses in this case, including document forgery and obstruction of justice, this court will recommend that the prosecutor pursue criminal charges against him. Every word from the judge was like a heavy hammer striking David's heart. When he heard the words criminal charges, he abruptly looked up, his eyes filled with despair and disbelief. He opened his mouth, as if to speak, but ultimately no words came out. He simply deflated like a punctured balloon, collapsing into his chair. I felt Mr. Henderson gently pat the back of my hand, a relieved smile on his face. I looked at him, my eyes a little misty. In that moment, I finally exhaled, as if a massive stone weighing on my heart had finally been lifted. After the court adjourned, David's lawyer hurried over and spoke to him in hushed tones. David merely shook his head blankly, then, like a zombie, was escorted out of the courtroom by his lawyer. Tom and Emily didn't even glance at David. They just quietly followed behind him, leaving in a hurry. I could sense they had already distanced themselves from David. After all, no one wants to be associated with a fraudster facing criminal charges. David's reputation was utterly ruined. A man once moderately known in the business world was now a reviled fraudster. He not only lost everything he would have gained from that old will, but he would also face jail time. To him, this was more painful than losing money. He had once valued his social standing and wealth so highly, and now he had nothing, his reputation in tatters. Stepping out of the courtroom, the warm sunlight fell upon my face. I took a deep breath, and the air felt fresh. Mr. Henderson patted my shoulder. "Martha, you won. Mr. Roberts' wishes have finally been fulfilled." I nodded, and tears finally streamed down my face. These weren't tears of sadness, but of relief and gratitude. "Robert, you really did it. You protected me." Back home, Maria was already waiting for me at the door. As soon as she saw me, she rushed forward and hugged me tightly. "Ma'am, are you all right? I heard you won." Her voice was filled with joy and excitement. "Yes, Maria, we won." I hugged her back, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. The house finally returned to quiet. David and his siblings had left, taking all their belongings. Even the documents they'd rummaged through in Robert's study, Mr. Henderson had sent someone to clear them out. Robert's study was mine again. I pushed open the door, and sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the antique desk. I walked over and gently ran my hand over the desktop, as if I could still feel Robert's presence. In the days that followed, I slowly began to adjust to life without Robert, but this time, I wasn't alone. My friends Lily, Bill, and Robert's old buddies all came to visit, bringing me warmth and support. They told me they were proud of me, proud that I had stood up for justice. I had reclaimed my home and regained my inner peace. I didn't choose to wallow in grief. Instead, I began to think about how I could ensure Robert's legacy lived on in a positive way. I discussed it with Mr. Henderson and decided to establish a charitable foundation in Robert's name. Robert had been an engineer, and he always cared deeply about talented children from impoverished families. So I decided to set up the Robert Harris Engineering Scholarship Fund, specifically to support underprivileged students aspiring to study engineering. I hope that through this fund, Robert's wisdom and spirit can continue to light up the future for more young people. Now my life had a new purpose. Every day, I'd visit the foundation and interact with the young students. I'd also join friends for community events and tend to my roses in the garden. I was no longer a widow trapped in the past. I was a vibrant, independent Martha. Late at night in the quiet, I would occasionally sit in the living room rocking chair, brew a cup of Robert's favorite Earl Grey tea, and flip through the photo album that chronicled our 10 years of happy marriage. In the photos, Robert was smiling so happily, so content. I knew he was always with me, protecting me in another way. He had promised me during his lifetime that he would always take care of me, ensuring I'd never want for anything. Now, I had fulfilled his last wish, not only preserving our home, but also allowing his love and kindness to live on forever in another form. Life, it changes in an instant, but sometimes change also means a new beginning. I looked out the window. Moonlight bathed the yard in tranquility. I knew the days ahead would only get better.